I was asked to keep this super professional, but I really don't know how to do that. You come in here and you tell me to make this whole intro for today because you want it to be professional because we're doing an interview, but I don't really know how to be professional in that type of manner. So now here we are, where I'm just going to ramble and let you nod your head, and what's up, buddy?
I couldn't ask for anything more professional than you, my friend. That works very well. Welcome, everybody.
I knew that you'd appreciate it. It's just one of those things that you have to do. You have to play the bit, whether you like the bit or not. The bit is happening.
The bit always happens. As long as we didn't talk about Doctor Who for an hour first, that's what
if we talked about Doctor Who for an hour, we would have lost our guest very, very quickly. And I would have been very sad, and I don't want that to happen.
Absolutely. But who the hell are we? We're two mediocre white dudes on a film, because you always need more mediocre white dudes.
I'm PJ.
Exactly. PLD on PLD Projects. If you like us already, you love us already, I'd have you not hit that like, subscribe, all that jazz. And if you don't, well, just keep watching and leave comments and stuff, and tell us how much you hate us. I'm okay with either or. It helps the algorithm out. Either way.
Honestly, I'm used to most people thinking we're just mediocre anyway. I thought that was why we built it into the name. So if you don't like us, it's fine. We already made fun of ourselves. You only have so much ammunition.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, PJ, let's say this. We started this podcast over 2 years ago now, I believe. It's been that long. Wow, amazing. We started out as definitively being a horror podcast. That's what we're going to be. We're going to be a weekly horror podcast. We realized with our schedule, weekly wasn't going to work, so we backed off. We also realized
because we were also in the middle of this whole thing was born out of us wanting to do talks and conversations because we were spending so much time together working on the show that we were involved in, that we were like, oh, we should just record a bunch of the conversations and talk about all the horror stuff we love, because Christian and everyone used to get so frustrated with us because we were pushing a horror tint on a TV show, trivia show, that they were like, why are you guys doing this? Like, there's more to movies than horror. To which I responded, yes, I'm aware, but
I mean, the movie Trivia Showdown was our life for a while. It's true. And one of the worst things about it was the fact that we did not get the Halloween exhibition that we were actually actively going to do. But I don't know. I just don't know what happened, but it is what it is. So we started this process out. We started this process out as a horror franchise thing. We started because we knew we wanted to talk about more. We decided we wanted to branch out. We do franchises now, but other franchises. We did Indiana Jones. We are going to do John Wick. We're going to do other things like that. But at the same time, I couldn't help but think we still want to err on the side of horror. That's the heart of our mission statement, so to speak. That's what we talk about more than anything else. And we always go back to horror. We started with Scream. We did our first of the big three. We did Halloween. And we just finished our second of the big three in the Friday the 13th saga. Well, we kind of finished it because that is what leads us to today.
Yeah. So, we had done all the Paramount Friday the 13th films, and we'd done the Jason films that New Line had done. But I had fallen in love with Never Hike Alone, which was this YouTube film basically that I had seen years ago, that one of our friends, a mutual named Dan Brunner, had kind of brought to our attention. And I was like, well, cool. I'm going to go ahead and watch this. And I fell in love with an iteration of Jason that I had not desperately known how badly I wanted to see again, which was the continuation of the franchise that I loved as a kid, and kind of picking up where everything feels like it kind of left off in a very interesting way in a world overrun with legacy sequels. This is one of those ones that feels really special because it isn't trying to be the, nostalgic, heartfelt version. It's just not trying to buck the trend of doing something different. It's a Jason movie made by Jason fans who want to take Jason in a fun direction.
And it's a smart way to do it. It doesn't try to do too much as far as I feel like sometimes studios recently try to do too much, making it they're too clever with themselves or too cute with themselves. They just know it works. They know what the fans loved. They can bring that back, and it feels like a natural continuation, which is all we ever really wanted. So I don't know why that studios seem to outthink themselves all the time, trying to go, oh, we got to do this, we got to no, just give us a good story, a good film that continues everything that we loved about the franchise before. And this is what they did. Now, I got to be honest, I never watched a lot of fan films. In fact, at first, I kind of felt a little bit like when I first heard, like, okay, yeah, I'll watch it, PJ, whatever. He sent it to me, and I was like, okay. And I watched it. I was like, wow, this really actually feels legitimate. This is better than honest. This is better than Part 8 and Part 9, as far as I'm concerned. At least. I'm like, this is really high. So that's high praise for me. I think that's what it actually fit in very, very well. So when we talked about doing Friday the 13th as our next run through the saga, PJ said we should do Never Hike Alone, and like he came at me like really strongly about it, and like I was going to fight back on him or something. I kind of feel like he feels like I was going to fight back on him, but I was like, well, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I just felt like it was important to treat this as part of the franchise, and I wanted to get more eyes on it.
Right.
And I was really afraid that, if we did it, not that you would push back, but people would be like, why are you covering a fan film? And it's like, but it's so much more than that to me.
Yeah.
It is so much more than just another fan film that exists. It's
right.
more than all of that. And it just felt like this was the right step.
And I will say a fan film sometimes gets that negative connotation to it.
Exactly.
But I really feel like it's like some of the best work that is out there. So the really good ones that really have the great intentions, they find their way without a budget at all for the most part and make it feel like a part of the saga. That's the important thing. So we did Never Hike Alone, Ghost Scout. We figured we'd do that one at that point, and we did Never Hike Alone 2. Now, the great thing about that was that PJ and I actually, because I live in New York, PJ lives in Arizona. We don't get to see each other much. But when I went out to visit him, when Never Hike Alone 2 came out. And so PJ and I actually got to sit down and watch it together for the first time, which was really cool. Alongside Dylan's New Nightmare, we actually watched that together at the same time as well.
Yeah.
More on that later. I guarantee you that. But we decided to do it. We did Never Hike Alone, the Ghost Cut. And PJ, on a lark, linked it up to Womp Stomp Films, let them know we were doing it. And then I put it up on the channel, and soon enough after, Womp Stomp Films had responded to me. And I try to respond to every comment. I like to have conversation with people. But it's usually, if it's a quick comment, I'll give you a quick answer. It's like, oh, this is great. This is a great episode. I love this. I'm like, oh, thanks for the watch. I appreciate it. Not much conversation. When I saw Womp Stomp's comment, I was like, wow, that's a long, in-depth comment. That's great. But I don't want to just give him a one-off comment. I didn't have time at the moment. So I'm like, okay, I'll go back later on tonight, and I'll respond to it properly. By the time I got back there's like 4 or 5 other comments, almost as in depth as the first one. I'm like, man, I could tell the passion of our guests, and I was so here for it. And I was like, I was like, this is why this works. This is the guy who's making this. This is the guy who loves it as much as we do. He is one of us. It's that gift. It's that gift. One of us.
One of us.
Really. So, PJ, you did reach out, and we are happy to say that we actually got the director of Never Hike Alone to come on board and have a conversation with us about himself, about Womp Stomp, about Friday the 13th, maybe horror in general. Who knows where we're going to go? Let's stop the smack and talk between us. Let's actually just get the gentleman on, and let's start talking and have this conversation. Without further ado, director Vincente DiSanti, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, guys. It's good to be here. Glad I don't have to like type out to answer everything. You can just I can just tell you. You know what I mean?
It's more exciting to actually have a one-on-one conversation with you and actually get to break down your mind a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I just want it noted that the podcast is 2 mediocre white dudes on film. Therefore, Vincent, not mediocre. We just need that to be remembered.
No, I'm filling out that third slot nicely. It's just nice.
So let's get right into it. We'll start with your interest in horror films. It's like, where did you first get your love for horror films?
I mean, I grew up in a house. I mean, I grew up in New England, so there's just a lot of like lore around here about ghost stories and haunted houses. And my mom read a lot of Stephen King, watched horror movies, allowed me to watch horror movies young. It was a, routine staple in our house that every Friday night we went to the rental store. We had one down the street. It was called Silver Screen Video. I would rent whatever I wanted: Puppet Master, Demonic Toys, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. And it was really just a culmination of like grabbing whatever was available, because a lot of people watched these movies in my area and they were constantly rented out. So it was a long time before I actually figured out the real story, or not even like there's a real story there, but like that Friday the 13th, I got to watch them all. It was like collecting Pokemon cards or like the Infinity Stones. I was like, I got to watch them all. And then I think, you know, for me, where this thing with Friday the 13th really started was I finally watched them all. And I felt like I had some sense that, okay, I kind of understand what Jason is now. It doesn't always make sense, but I have this sort of idea of what he is and what he could be. And then part 9 came out and did exactly all the opposite things and sort of took the franchise in a direction that always upset me as a fan. I was just like, why? Like, of everything, like, why? And I never understood why. And then, you know, it was always like, oh, were they going to fix it into the next one? And then it was Jason X. And I actually enjoyed Jason X just because it was like, you know, no one had any expectations with that. They were obviously just kind of shooting for something with it. And I didn't really count on it to like carry the lore of Friday the 13th. Freddy versus Jason kind of glossed over it. And then when the remake came out, I was expecting like, finally, like they've watched all 12 movies. They know that there's a mystery to be solved here, that no one's actually really put their thumb on saying, this is what Jason is, this is how he operates, and this is where it goes. And I felt like 2009 did almost the same thing that the old films did, which was gloss over it. And I felt that although they, you know, delivered on paper what is a, you know, textbook Friday the 13th film, I was like, I kind of want this series to evolve a little bit. I want to see a little bit more out of it. I think that there's something more here. There's more depth to it that I'm not getting out of the studios. And as they developed it for many years, I was, you know, working in Hollywood at the time. I was trying to get on different productions. I was tracking it behind the scenes and like watching it go up and down. And eventually I just decided one day that like I think seen some fan films on a home release. Like they had them as like a special feature, like hidden away somewhere. And I watched a couple of them and I thought that they were decent. And I always thought it'd be fun to make my own one. And Never Hike Alone really just started as that. Like I thought it would be fun to make a Friday the 13th fan film with my friends. It'd be fun to build a costume. I was finally making enough money in the industry to sort of go out and buy the clothes and get a mask made and do things that wasn't like extremely expensive, but sort of, instead of being online and being a super nerd about it, talking about it with people online and sort of saying, well, I think Jason should look like this, and pulling all this reference and doing all this stuff, I was like, I'm just going to build it. Like, instead of talking about it, I'm just going to show people what's in my brain because I need to get it out of my brain. And that's really where it all stemmed from. And how this whole thing really got started.
Wow, that's I come from New York. I said New York, so close to New England, so I definitely understand that aspect of it, the whole video store thing. In fact, when Part 9 came out, my friend and I decided we rented parts 1 through 8. We went to 3 different video stores. We had to find them, rented 1 through 8, and watched them the night before. Went to see 9, and we're like, what the f just happened? But at the same time, it was still kind of a nice communal experience, and that's what horror basically is. I think more than any other genre, horror is a really communal experience. Horror fans tend to be less judgmental, less gatekeepy overall, and for the most part. I would say for the most part.
You know, we've talked about that a bit on here too, because you're kind of not wrong in some capacities, but I think because even the lesser entries make us, we kind of love them, like they're like our underdogs. So we just go, you know, we know you're not perfect, but there's a lot of things we like. And I think that's why I love certain horror fans. Like even the stuff we don't always love, there's some parts where we're like, oh, they kind of get part of it. So now we just kind of love the thing. And loving horror is really special for that reason, I feel like.
I agree.
Yeah, sometimes we there's like a black sheep in every franchise that sort of that gets forgiven, and then one of them, like there's multiple ones. One of them gets extremely hated, and the other one gets forgiven, and they both basically break all the same rules in many different ways. But for some reason, one gets a nod over the. It's a weird thing. I always describe that to people as Friday the 13th is like watching. It's like eating a pizza with 12 different slices. You know, there's a couple of ones that are kind of the same, but like you don't know what you're going to get with each slice, and a lot of people are going to like something different. And if you ask them what their favorite thing about the series is, you're bound to get a whole bunch of different answers. And I think that that's sort of one of the things that makes Friday the 13th special, is that there is, as much as I saw it in a certain way, I also acknowledge that the series itself is so broken that it can splinter off into other timelines. If you follow certain rules and kind of bounce off things from the previous films, there's like almost two sort of origin stories that exist side by side for a little while, and then the undead just sort of takes over and goes. And so with Never Hike Alone, I was just sort of like, well, the thing that would make the most sense if it was just undead the whole time. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
and Victor Miller said he died in the original movie. So let's take the original movie as like the only thing that is canon, and let's take everything that came after it as inspiration, but it exists in a world where these are the things that would sort of happen for this type of creature to exist. And that's sort of like how it kind of came about. But I think that like it was sort of based on necessity, because when Never Hike Alone came out, I had a certain vision for Jason about how I wanted to create a Jason movie. But the lore of it really became more explored after sort of we brought people on, and the scope started to get bigger, and I had to kind of figure out sort of how is this actually going to, can you watch this and feel like it's a natural extension? And that's the things I wanted to talk to you guys about, because I know you guys had a ton of questions. And it was just, I always wanted to talk about this with people because it's like, you guys actually appreciate it. So it's really nice. You know what I mean? It's actually like nice to sit down and be like, hey, so here's what this jumped off of, and making a reference. You guys are going to understand the references. And I think that that's going to be really, really fun tonight.
Well, and I think the biggest for me, and one of the coolest, is the fact that you get Tom Matthews to come back. And like, what a cool thing, because there's so many iterations of Tommy Jarvis that you could have picked from. And I love that that is the one you segged off of, because to me, he is kind of the peak Tommy Jarvis in my head, because to me, Friday 6, he just does such a cool job. Where was it along the way that kind of came to fruition for you, and like, how did you pull into that?
It was set up by one of our executive producers, Barry J, who had met Tom through a mutual friend. We had shot half the film already. Like, we had the original ending just had Jason showing up at the ambulance and killing everybody, and and that was it. And then Barry approached me one day and he said, I'm going to get a lunch with Tom or dinner with Tom. I'm going to ask him if he wants to be a Never Hike Alone. And I just kind of laughed like, yeah, okay. And Barry came back from the meeting and was like, Tom's interested. And he had saw the first trailer and sort of like that piqued his interest. But at that moment, he was sort of like, no to fan films. I'm not going to be the fan film guy. I remember him saying that. And not to say it like he said it derogatory to me. He was just saying like, this is what I expected of myself. But we had a lunch, and I showed him what we had shot in the fall of 2016, because we had raised half our budget at that point, and we had done it privately because our Kickstarter had actually failed. And so we raised enough money to go shoot about half the film. There were a lot of stunt sequences, but a lot of things also went wrong. And we sort of had sequences that were there, but needed a lot of work and needed extra days of shooting. And so our idea was that we were going to, go to Indiegogo, raise more money, and then kind of take it off from there. And in the middle of all that, Tom sort of came into the mix. And I was like, listen, I don't know, like we failed to raise the money last time. And so I don't want to make any, I don't want to cash, write any checks I can't cash. So the only thing I have in addition to what this story about Kyle is, because I'm not going to establish a story about you all of a sudden and, our budget would fly through the roof. We have this ambulance scene, and there's a moment where the doors open up, and I sort of had as a gag thing, like, people think they're like, oh, it's Jason coming, but it's the driver of the ambulance. And then Jason shows up a minute later. But I was like, but if that's you, I think that has some power. And if you do it, here's what you get. Like, not only will you do the movie, we'll sign you onto it, you'll get paid for it, or you'll get paid for it if you show up. But if halfway through the year you don't want to do it, you can back out. We're not going to tell anybody you're in this movie. We're not going to utilize you in any way, shape, or form like that. I think that this has more impact if people don't see it coming. And so it was sort of something that we held on to. It became like a very tight-knit secret in the group. Only a few people knew. We shot the rest. We raised the money. So we showed him the second trailer. He liked it. He said yes. He said, let's do it. I wrote a few iterations at the end. There was one where everybody died, and he was like, you can't kill Tommy. I was like, I know, fans would kill me. And then there was one where everybody got away, and it felt sort of lackluster. Like, we go this whole time and there's no kills. I got to do something. Because in my head, the original version was that like the guy gets pulled out, he gets killed. The other two, EMTs get out, they get killed. And then he climbs into the ambulance, and there's like, it ends with the drone shot pulling up, and there's blood just flying out of the back of the ambulance. And that's how it was supposed to end. And then it tilted up, and then it went to the mountains, and it was like, never hike alone. And so that was like the lesson that was supposed to be learned by the film. And that was what the original spirit of the original one was, is that a guy who almost gets away and then gets killed. And in fact, Mark Hill's story in Never Hike in the Snow is really the original story of Never Hike Alone, about almost getting away, and at the very last moment, Jason snatches you and drags you back into the woods because you hiked alone and you stumbled into his territory. And so it was actually when that was the point where we got to tell sort of, I don't know, the story went in all these different directions because Tom came into the movie. So we came up with the ending that we came up with, and it allowed us to sort of give Tom his heroic moment, surprise people, and do that. And I got to say, like, that was one of the funnest times as just doing all of this was like, unlike dropping that bomb on Friday the 13th, after they had just canceled the movie. They canceled the movie that year. And my whole approach to it was Friday the 13th fans are so down right now. Like, there's nothing, like, the game is out and that's fun, but we want a movie. And, people are sort of looking at this like sideways because they know it's a fan film and they don't think it's going to be any good. And then all of a sudden, like, they watch the movie. And for me, what it was I wanted to reintroduce people to Crystal Lake through my eyes. Yeah. And sort of show people that, like, this is what it means. Like, to me, this is hallowed ground, and you have to treat it and shoot it and design it. And you got to tell stories from the past. Don't just show, like, that wasn't, to us, that wasn't just a camp office. That was Steve Christie's office. It wasn't just, the bunk beds from the, like, and it's true that if you don't clean up if you don't send or hire someone in to go clean up a crime scene, it will stay that way forever. And our lore became that Camp Crystal Lake was so cursed and nobody wanted anything to do with it. They just let the state reclaim it, and it's been closed ever since. And no one has ever gone back to it. They built near it, like Camp, Forest Green is near the original Camp Crystal Lake, but it's not in the Camp Crystal Lake. And so in my head, the camps that are in Never Hike Alone are actually a mix of Forest Green and Camp Crystal Lake, but they all got changed to Crystal Lake. And that's why they sort of look different in a different way. But we don't ever say, like, you know what, this used to be the old Forest Green. Like, it's just
no, right.
You know what I mean? It's just, you just let it naturally be. And so if anybody ever asked, you'd be like, well, here's the extra meaning to that. But there was never an opportunity to sit down and say that. And like, they wouldn't even talk about it.
Right.
So, and that's sort of what happens with, I think, like, where Jason is in the first movie, that's definitely the original camp. And the idea is that Jason lives above the kitchen, and that's where his mother lived when they first moved in there, because they didn't have a place for them. She didn't want to leave Jason. He couldn't live with the kids. So they put him in the pantry above the kitchen. So they had a little bed up there, and that's where they sort of hung out. So that way they never had to leave that area. And so these are all the things that were sort of mixing it and sort of just designing that way. And Kyle became sort of this Never Hike Alone 2, the way I designed it was like, I wanted people to think it was just a normal horror movie about a guy going into the woods and facing some type of creature. And slowly but surely, if you're paying attention to the right keys, like Wessex County, the no trespassing sign and the way that it's done, obviously Jason in the background, but he kind of looks like Jason, but is that Jason? And then getting into Camp Crystal Lake, and people realize halfway through, like, holy shit, this is a Friday the 13th movie. Like, and I think about all of the other found footage movies that have come out that have sort of gone this way and sort of done those things. Like, even if you go back to Blair Witch or anything like that, it's like the only thing I've ever wanted to see out of any of those types of situations is somebody do that with Jason. And I'm not even a huge found footage fan, but once I figured out that I could just pull sort of 127 hours in the Martian type visual formula, that we could get the best of both worlds. And it was a great way to sort of like, all right, things got crazy in Friday the 13th, but let's go back to the basics. What do we know about camp? Like, what do we know about it? It happened at a camp. It involved this guy, Jason. It started with his mother, and it's a camp legend, and people talk about it, but no one really knows what really happened. And so start from there in a place where I think that no matter whether you're a giant Friday the 13th fan or whether you don't really watch the films, that you can sort of seamlessly pick up with our story right from there. And go along with it and go along with this character. And Andrew Lady had to do a very hard job of carrying the movie by himself for a long time. And then he had to spend another half of the movie, doing stunts and jumping into things. And we had his stunt double, Donnie Nichols, who was doing the high falls and jumping into the trees. And, we were going up every weekend and shooting it. And it was really just like this, it became this organic thing that, really came out of us just kind of going for it. And, we stumbled across that camp by accident. We were kind of tipped off to it. And we ended up going from this exterior location to finding that abandoned camp and realizing that we had all the main cabin, when Kyle walks into the main cabin and sees it right there, like that was us. Like, a lot of the story of Never Hike Alone is our true story of how we found the camp, about discovering the lost trail that wasn't on the map anymore, which is a true story. We found a trail that wasn't on the map anymore. We followed it to Camp Crystal Lake. We found those buildings. That's how we found those rooms. We just dressed them up a little bit and sort of added different things to it. And we said, let's just apply Jason to this formula, because we could come up with an original killer, but it just wouldn't be as cool. It wouldn't be Jason. It would be faux Jason. You know what I mean? It would be like, oh, he's got a catcher's mask on. You know what I mean? It's you can feel slasher films sometimes sort of reaching for another mask that they wish that they could just put a hockey mask on him. You know what I mean? And just tell that story. And for me, my whole aim was like, I want to do what no studio has done before, and like really sort of focus on the terror and, you know, the oncoming storm that is Jason, and like what it's like to sort of like I've always had those nightmares. Like some of it was based on some of my nightmares, like getting grabbed in the foot while crawling around the forest. I had that nightmare all the time. Like I was watching Jason in some way, and then he'd see me and kind of dig me out of a bush, kind of like in part 5, probably where that nightmare started. And in fact, part 5 I love so much because of the ghost Jason in that, and the way that he appears and the way that he haunts Tommy. I thought that was one of the scariest things. Like, just appears at the end of your bed. I'm sitting in bed as a kid being like, he's going to appear at the end of my bed. How does he have this power? You know what I mean? So a lot of that stuff, that was just naturally sort of like drilled into me that scared me as a kid, I just tried to bring back and put on screen, but do it in a way that wasn't hokey, or at least not as hokey, I guess you could say.
Wow, I got a lot to break that down. I will say I'm not as big a fan of 5. PJ loves 5. I'm like, but I do love that aspect of 5. It was the copycat thing that kind of threw me, and always kind of left a sour taste in my mouth. But the ghost Jason part of it is easily the best parts of 5 for me. But I wanted to touch base, especially you watched the podcast, you saw some of my misgivings, and I realized after I watched the movie and I saw your comments, some of my stuff was about like, I'd never seen Jason with the lore that way. I never thought about Jason that way because we've never attacked it that way. It's never been attacked that way. So when you mentioned that, it really turned a light bulb on. And I actually went back and watched it again, and I watched it with that intent. I loved it even more without time through, because I finally saw what your intentions were. I'm like, so we're actually doing more lore here. It's something we're trying to change things up a little bit. And I really loved that decision to do, because you could copy it all the time. You can copy you can do a copy paste, and it would have been fine because it's Jason killing people in the camp. You get the right tone, you get the right things. But when you see like, we're going to actually care about this character and see, well, what would this character be like outside of just the giant monster, like as he goes through. At the same time, you don't like do the whole like faux pas of Michael crying or whatever. You don't like do anything stupid like that with it. They want to kind of go into that. You actually just instead realistically go through and lay that little groundwork for the audience to follow. And once they got that, I think that was a brilliant choice. I love that aspect. They got to throw that in there. So.
Yeah, no, I think that like that really came from sort of once we had Never Hike Alone made, in the sense of like, well, he's just been hidden well this whole time.
Right.
Then I introduced Tommy into it. And so the Friday the 13th in me had to answer the fan in me saying like, well, if Tommy was around, how did Tommy not find Jason? And that's really where the story of Never Hike in the Snow came in, because Never Hike in the Snow is a model for, this is the formula for how Jason has been able to get away with this since he returned from Manhattan. And he has receded into the forest. He has a new set of rules. He isn't just all offense. He is mostly defense. He plays it very close to the cuff because he has learned that when he disturbs the town, they show up with pitchforks and he ends up in the lake, or he ends up getting set on fire. And, he's finally reclaimed his mother's head, and he's been reunited with it. And he started this new era of like, I'm just going to protect my peace. And if I can just protect my peace, everything will be okay. So in the first movie, Kyle is just encroaching on his peace. And Jason is giving him a lot of leeway. In fact, it would do Jason a lot of justice if he comes all the way through Camp Crystal Lake, films all these things, and doesn't get one glimpse of Jason. And so that's sort of what Jason's aim is to not be caught on camera. And it isn't until that Kyle crosses the line of finding his mother that he steps in and he realizes that, okay, I'm going to do what I've done to basically all these hundreds of people. It's grab them, kill them, go, and like throw them off the second story. And like the joke in part 1 is that everything Jason does killed somebody in a previous movie, but Kyle survives. And it confuses Jason for a moment. Like he throws him off the second story and he's crawling and he's like, what the fuck? And then so he drops down and he gets the axe and he runs and he swings to hit him, and the guy moves. What the fuck? Who moves? This is a slasher film. Stay put. you know,
It's
and
almost
so
like
Like, I don't
Jason-
understand. Why are
Yeah.
you messing with my mojo, man?
It's
Yeah,
almost like
and
Jason being the other side of it. Like Jason, like, 'cause usually it's the teens are like, oh my god, I hit Jason with an axe and he's still moving. It's actually the opposite of that, which actually makes it even even funnier to watch.
yeah, and so there's little comedy things in it for me because I understand what's going on in Jason's brain, and he's like, "What the fuck?" And what I love about part one and what it leads into with part two is that it's waking Jason back up to the Jason that we remember. He is sort of like, for lack of better terms, like Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. Like he's grumpy, living in a hut, like doesn't want to be bothered by anybody. And then someone rises him out of the cage, and this one gets away. And now everything that he's worked for the last 20 years is down the chute. And he's like, fuck it, kamikaze time. We're going back to the old ways. I'm going into town and we're going to do it. And at the end of Never Hike Alone 1, I can't tell you how bad I just wanted to pick up right there and keep going. I was just out of money and we were out of time. We had to show something. And we actually ended up getting the Film and Telluride Horror Show. So we're like, we'll just finish the story here and we'll go there. We ended up doing that. And obviously, you know, it hit big with fans, and I couldn't be more grateful for that. And it was just fun to see people, like, again, the whole Tommy of it all, with them like seeing the doors open at the end. They watch the movie, they actually really enjoy it, and then all of a sudden they get Tommy at the end, like, which is another, like, how long have we been waiting for him to come back, and how long have the studios been like, we don't need to bring that character back, or we don't need to try to build a character off of him. In fact, I know that at one point Jason Goes to Hell was supposed to have Tommy, and the studio was like, we don't need Tommy, like, don't go down that road, like, a whole new story. And really what I was doing is, I think I was giving like just sort of like, to me, they were layups. Like, these are the layups that you could just do. Like, it's so easy to kind of execute a few of these things, give them Tommy. And then from there, it was really the challenge of, like, I've sort of painted myself into a corner. I have really made this moment in time of Friday the 13th really cemented, and people really like it. Now I have to make it fit in the rest of the world. Where does it stand? How do we get from here to there? And what are the stories that are being told? And at the same time, you know, I had been kind of consulting on a bunch of other fan films, and I had been pitching to everybody, you want to hit one out of the park right off the bat and do it really easily, go shoot one in the snow. And everybody turned me down. Everybody was like, no, we don't want to shoot in the snow, and blah, blah, blah. And then I realized, I realized how far Never Hike Alone 1 got away from Never Hike Alone, the original sort of concept. And then I thought, well, why don't I just do that original short, which is supposed to, again, only be 5 minutes. And I'm just going to do it in the snow, like, really short. And it was literally the original idea was to put an axe in somebody's mouth and split their head kind of open like a Pez dispenser. And it was sort of like this thing that I wanted to do for a long time. And I started to see that it picked up steam, and we wanted to raise money to do it. I knew it was going to be like, we hadn't raised more than $50,000. So the idea of doing it in parts made sense at the time. And we were going to raise 50 or 75 for snow, and then kind of move into, the next part, which is like the 3 acts of Never Hike Alone, or Never Hike Alone 2, which would have been expanded a little bit in different ways, but we sort of condensed it back down into another film after that. But it was really to start to tell, like, Never Hike in the Snow is really, what I would say is that Never Hike Alone, Kyle MacLeod is sort of our Luke Skywalker, where he's sort of opening up the universe again, where there is a new hope. You know what I mean? Like, he's the one who finally, after all these years, he's the one who escapes, and he changes the course of history and starts all these other things into motion. But there are other things that have been in motion even before Kyle got there. So let's talk about those things, and a great example was Mark Hill, because it was a young kid who just moved to town, who goes missing. So what happens when somebody goes missing? Let's answer that question. And we saw the way that Rick just disgustingly overlooks everything because he can't get over his blind hatred for Tommy. Right. And Tommy is out there looking for Jason, but the cops are getting in his way. And then when Tommy does go out there, he can't find Jason. And there's just all these near misses, like even sort of the events of part 7, like that happened. Tommy wasn't around. And by the time Tommy got there, he's standing at the crime scene tape and he can't get over the tape. But what does he see beyond the tape? He sees EMT, firefighters, police. So he goes, maybe I become an EMT. It sort of gets me into the inner know. And now he's in the inner know. And what does Jason do? He escapes Crystal Lake and he takes a boat to Manhattan. He goes even further away from Tommy. And what I loved about the Tommy story that really started to develop for me is that Tommy became Don Quixote, and he was becoming a little bit of a crazy Ralph. And he had to ride the line. And one of the things I wanted to expand upon that I never got to was this additional storyline where there was a hospital sort of general manager that I would have asked Judy Aronson to play. And she would have been his
Ooh.
boss, and then basically said, like, listen, I heard you ran into Rick this morning, and I got to tell you, like, you're putting your job on the line. Like, it's hard for me to employ you, you know, and all these things. It's bad enough I got you here that you were a suspect, you know, and that, you know, we're not letting you know that you were a suspect in her son's disappearance, you know, for a hot minute there. But, you know, and it's Tommy's sort of lucky that, that, you know, the deputy went missing while he was in custody, because that sort of proved that he had nothing to do with it, and that must have been something else. And like, and there's little clues along the way, like, you know, them talking about how there were footprints going out to the lake and leading out to the ice. Well, that's Jason grabbing all the bodies and jumping in the water and hiding. And you know what I mean? Like, it's all these like little, like, it's like, and he's like, oh, we thought he fell through the ice. They're like, no, that was just Jason cleaning it. Because he, like, at that point, you know, Jason knows. And what does Jason do? He retreats to the lake where he knows he can hide, where he hid for all those years, or was hidden for all those years before he even came back. So he knows that there's a place in the lake that he can go. And so there's all these little things where you see Jason starting to get smarter and outthink Tommy and do it. And it isn't until Kyle outsmarts him and bests him that, you know, it breaks the chain. But all of a sudden, Tommy is this guy who, you know, all these years has been talking about how he's going to fight this dragon. Now the dragon's here, and can he do it? And so what Never Hike Alone evolved from was this, like, sort of tale about don't never hike alone, like, never hike alone, like, or you're going to die, into like, if you want to defeat true evil, never hike alone. Like, you got to get help. Like, you can't do it all by yourself. And that's sort of what the message of the end was, when you have all those Power Rangers shots with the four of them lined up working together against, I kept calling them the Power Rangers shots. I was like, okay, oh, now the Power Rangers assemble.
Accurate. Yeah.
You know, everybody's got their color that they're wearing. Like, it's, you know, meeting at the high school would be great.
So good.
But there's a lot of that type of stuff. And I, you know, at that point I was just, you know, trying to be, you know, there's now I'm continuing lore from, you know, Tommy McLaughlin's movie and Joe Zito, and, you know, even, you know, part 7 and part 8, and weaving sort of these elements all together, and then also building off of my own. So it became sort of this merger of all these different ideas from Friday the 13th as it got bigger. And it was sort of fun to watch it evolve and sort of get bigger throughout the day. But the whole point of it was all of those different stories. It was, you know, Tommy finding redemption, Kyle just trying to survive, Diana trying to find answers, and sort of being the mother who lost a son, echoing the story of Jason. Like, that's how far Jason has fallen. He is now taking the mothers of sons and doing exactly what was done to his mother. And so what good is he really doing? And that's sort of the struggle that he's internally struggling with. And that's sort of what Disappear is about. Like, I killed these kids. It's not getting any further. I killed this kid, Mark. I didn't have to. I got myself caught on camera. It's my fault. Mother shows up, comforts him, and he's interrupted by someone else who now I got to take him away. And that guy was a dad and had a newborn kid. Right. And, you know, and that guilt weighs on Rick, who's sort of trying to figure this out. And you see Rick sort of recede into his shell because he doesn't want to share information or get anyone else in the case, because if anyone else goes to investigate with him, they might go missing and it will be his fault again. And so everyone's carrying this guilt, and it's all tied. And I think you guys kind of touched upon this, was that it's the curse. Like, because people are going to the camp, and because people are interacting with it in some way, or have interacted with it in some way, they've been marked. And so these things also sort of supernaturally follow them around too. So that's sort of what the flashbacks were. And that's what I think the flashbacks are in part 5. They are a supernatural extension of the trauma and curse, you know, both internally and supernaturally, because the curse curse never dies. It only waits. It waits for you to come and scratch it again. And so what's it doing? It's creating the scratch. It's creating the itch.
Right.
Oh, I'm still out there. Come find me, Tommy. You know what I mean? So like, it's making sure that people want to come back and let it go. And I think that was sort of, once I understood that was the supernatural element about it, because it was revenge. You know, it was based on this revenge. It was built on these things, and all of these people that sort of got involved with it in some way or shape or form, either like escape the revenge in some way, or we're still dealing with it and we're going to be called in to collect another one, because whatever this dark force that is driving it all, it's addicted to death, and it wants more death, and it's pushing, you know, it answered. Like, I came up with this idea for a Pamela story for a long ago, that like, I had this line where she admits that, you know, she stood on the dock one night and begged God to like return her son to her, but she thinks the wrong God listened. And so
wow.
ever since then, she's been seeing her son that's been driving her crazy, and it's been telling her to do things that he never would say. That it doesn't seem like it's my boy, but it is him. And I got it, and I don't know if I should listen. And sort of like you see her sort of turning there, but again, like there's something there that is, you know, when I read about it, you know, when I read about sort of supernatural curses, and I was basing it off of what Tom McLaughlin kind of set up in part 6, where Tommy was like, we got to return him to the place where he died.
Yeah.
That for me was a big key element, to be like, well, if you're returning him to the place that he died and he's trying to put him back into the lake, that means he drowned. Right. Because if you want to take him back to the place he died, you should go back to your house and throw him into the living room. Like, that
right?
So it was like, you know, the people will say like, well, he survived the drowning and did all that stuff. And to me, that never made a lot of sense. Like, we needed to answer some questions before you could let that go.
Right.
And so for me, because it was, you know, we went to the supernatural, and if you do research about paranormal stuff and poltergeists and revenants, everything's built around like a tragedy. Tragic event that brings something back. And then I started doing the research on revenants, and that's where the Ghost Jason really came from. The Ghost Jason was something that fans came up with. You know, we were trying to come up with a name for the hockey mask. Somebody came up with Ghost Hawk, and then somebody else was like, Ghost Hawk, you should call him Ghost Jason. And I was like, yes, like all of this. And then, you know, Revenant came into the mix, and it all mixed together. And sort of with that full vision, I was able to write the Never Hike in the Snow through Never Hike Alone 2. It just became like a son of a bitch to get produced, because we did Never Hike in the Snow, COVID, and then Dylan's New Nightmare and Jason Rising got delayed. So we come out of COVID, we get Jason Rising done. You know, that was a ton of fun. And that was like a whole nother bag of tricks that we went into. Yeah. And then it was Dylan's New Nightmare, which is another one that we had to get done and get out there, because we had promised it to people. Never Hike Alone 2 was right behind it. And, you know, that got delayed another year. We shot it in 2023, though, like jumping from delay to delay, you know, shooting up until I think 3 weeks before release. Oof. And then, you know, that's when we shot the Larry scene, like the whole FBI sort of like him doing the thing. Like that was I was staying at a friend's house, and we shot that in her backyard, and we just made it look like the forest. Like literally just like, if we just aim this way, we're just going to catch the tree and the fence. It's going to be perfect. It's going to feel like we're in a national park.
I mean, that's a very Friday the 13th type of thing to do. Remember, Corey Feldman shot in his backyard for part 5 too. So, you know, you're just keeping tradition.
So see, you're getting it, because I said that on set. I was like, hey, this is kind of like this is in the spirit. We were supposed to shoot at the original Tommy Jarvis house. Like the scene, there was a scene that got cut out of the movie because it didn't make much sense where it went. It wasn't doing anything for us. It was just like Rick driving in his car, they were like, he's at the hospital, and he's like, I'll be right there. But that we ended up shooting it at the wrong time, so we never used it. But there was supposed to be a scene where like he shows up at the Jarvis house and like kicks in the door, and he's looking for Tommy, and that's when he gets the call that he's at the hospital.
Right.
And we were supposed to do that whole opening scene in Tommy's house, where he wakes up in his childhood bedroom, and you weren't going to really realize it at first. And then there was a whole point where he leaves after seeing Jason, that like you'd see the car pulling away from the Jarvis house, and we'd see it in the background. But we ended up losing the location because people had shot there during COVID, and sort of it didn't go well. And so the owners were like, we just really don't want people shooting here anymore. We're sort of retiring it from that. And like, you can come do like one exterior, but we don't want you in the living room. We don't want you in the bedrooms. We don't want you. And I was just like, juice isn't worth the squeeze to pay all that money just for one exterior shot.
Right.
So absolutely. We had to drop that. But that was that was one of my favorite sort of like non-Jason scenes. I think in my head was him coming into Tommy's house, realizing that Tommy still lives there. Like, and then sort of being at the moment where Jason died, and like being at the place where Jason originally died, and then getting a call that Tommy was at the hospital and leaving, and we'd leave sort of like that. So there were like things that like, you know, I'm very proud of Never Hike Alone 2, but there were a few things that we had to drop off that I think that if we were a studio movie and we were able to do the studio version of Never Hike Alone 2, like the idea in the attic wasn't to just steal the head, drop it, and go. Like they couldn't find the head in the original version. And so instead of they worked, couldn't find it. Jason was coming in. They were like, fuck, we got to do something. They hide. Jason goes in the attic, and when he goes into that door and he's looking for them, they close the door behind it and run a chain through the door. And they realize that he tipped over all the gas cans. Like remember when Kyle flicks the gas can in the first movie? all the gas cans are tipped over and they set the attic on fire and they jump out the window door to nowhere. And so when they're down there thinking maybe everything's burning up and maybe this might do it, you hear Jason like break through the chains, stomp, 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 jump through the door. He's on fire, carrying his mother's head, and like lands in like the Superman pose and like stands up on fire. Dude, lightning across his back, and then the sky opens up, and just like part 6, the rain washes the fire away.
Oh my God.
At that moment, like that's when he tries to attack and all this stuff, and they get into the fight then, and that's how that fight started. And a lot of the same things happened where it goes to a draw, Tommy runs off, and that stuff all kind of happened there. But those are like some of the things. Like there was a whole house party massacre scene we never got to do, where we were going to do like a kill montage of him like murdering a big house party, and we were going to do it to like a remix of Wu-Tang. And it was just going to be like, it was going to be so much fun. It was just like, yeah, it's like the L. Michaels Affair Shimmy Shimmy Ya remix, and it's just like little kids singing Shimmy Shimmy Ya, Shimmy Yeah, Shimmy Yeah. So it's like these little kids singing while he's just like murdering people, and like big elaborate kills. Like there was going to be one where the guy trying to just like shut the door and like hold it, and he just bursts through the door and like smushes the guy against the wall. Like 3 kids run out of the house. He jumps down from the second story, pulls down the gutter, and like stabs all 3 of them like a shish kebab, and then they fall forward, and all the blood runs down the gutter.
Little Last Crusade too, Indy, shooting the 3 Nazis all at once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff like that. I mean, obviously big ideas, but then we had to scale it down to like what were the Judy side of it. There were maybe a couple other characters we could have thrown in, but at the end of the day, we had to pull it down to like really the bare essential characters that were carrying the heart of the story. And so I think that like we got that. Like I was able to make, like, I got the core of it. It was like I see it for the bells and whistles that I wanted to put on it sometimes too, but it's nice to see people enjoying it. And for me, it was really about like getting Jason, like we want to get to the place where like, obviously Jason has to die. Like at some point Jason has to die, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
So let's get it to a place where even fans, like, how do I get it to a place where fans will be like, go ahead, I'm ready.
Yeah,
like, I'm ready to do it. You know what I mean? I'm ready to see it. Like, because I'm always in a place where I never wanted to see Jason die. Like the opening of Jason Goes to Hell, like blew my mind. And I was so mad. And I was like, Jason doesn't die. This is bullshit. You know what I mean? And so I was like, I knew I was fighting the 12-year-old in me who was like, don't you dare do it. Don't you dare kill him. And, so I guess that's where the idea for the bubble came from at the end, but just like the last little bubble. Yeah, but I think I gotta stay true to the curse too, right? Because the curse truly never dies. But if Jason can find rest, and Jason can realize that he doesn't have to be out there protecting his mother, or that he doesn't owe anything to his mother anymore, or that he can just let it go, that he can find peace at the bottom of the lake and just stay there, and that's where he'll enjoy it. If he is ever disturbed by, say, some wannabe hiker who wants to follow in his hero's footsteps, that
Hikerman 5000,
he could be disturbed and he could come back to life when he wants, but it will be on his terms moving forward. And he really will become like the creature of the lake at that point. And that's sort of where I would have taken that story if we had decided to keep going right away. Maybe I'll come back to it in a couple of years. But for now, I really want to focus on like some original stuff and some other things that I've been putting off for a couple of years because of all of this. Obviously with Tom getting up there and Vinny getting up there, it was like I couldn't wait 5 years. Like by then they'd be like, all right, I'm ready. Not to say that, Tom, I love you guys, but like even Vin for this one was sort of like, he's dealing with some stuff, and he put on a brave face and went out there and worked through it. And we rode around some of those things, and he kicked that. He went out there and he kicked ass. And that's the one thing I was like, Vin, I want to make you look like a badass in this. You're going to go out like a badass. Rick wasn't originally supposed to die. Rick was supposed to survive and show up at the end after Jason got killed and everyone was standing there on the beach. I was actually going to do the most obscure Loaded Weapon 1 joke where a helicopter comes up on the beach and Rick's hanging out of it. And he's like, where is he? And it just cuts to time. And he's like, we're good. Because
you're going to do the John McClane. You go down the beach. Yeah. Thanks. I love that. That is perfect.
So there's a little bit of that humor there, but that Rick was now finally there to bring the cavalry, and like the boats are coming up on the shore, like here come the state police, and then it's over, you know what I mean? And then shows up just in time. But we had to pull out the whole there was a whole sheriff station. Actually, this is a pretty cool tidbit. There was a whole sheriff station sequence where they, after the hospital, everything, all the batteries are ripped out, which literally I set that up in snow on purpose for that. That joke was in that thing the whole, like it was always going to happen.
Gotcha. Okay.
But they were supposed to run over to the sheriff's station and barricade themselves in one of the cells. Like Rick was locked in the cell back in part 6. So I was like, let's bring that back. They used it to protect themselves from Jason. And that sort of moment where he shoots him happens where he comes down, like they lock themselves in the cell. Jason comes down. He's trying to get them through the bars. It's not a very deep cell. So there is a little bit of like the fate that's like right there. Rick shoots him in the face. And when he shoots him in the face, same thing. He like tips back and then he tips forward. But this time it cracks the mask in half. And it falls off his face, and we were going to do a face reveal. And then he tries to pull the bars off the wall, and he almost does it until that deputy dispatch, who is the one who reported the murder, he shows up with a bunch of guns, and he's the one shooting Jason. So he leads Jason away from them. He barricades himself in the armory. He thinks Jason's going to come through the door. Jason comes through the wall and just like crushes his head against the wall. And when they're in there, there's something in the armory where it's this big plaque. In the middle of a plaque, there is the hockey mask from part 7 that the fire department picked up and clicked together. Yeah. It's sort of stitched back together and in a case where it said for Garris. Okay. You know what I mean? They kind of found this thing and they gifted it to the police station. And Rick didn't know what to do with it, so he just hung it back in the armory, and that's where it is. So Jason reclaims his old mask, puts it on, and then returns to, you know, they drive away, and then he jumps in the lake and all that stuff. So that's where the extension. So that's because we didn't do that. I worked in the story of like, okay, then we're going to work in, he gets shot in the face. We'll get the mouth pull on the original side, and then we'll put the axe in his head, and we'll get the ghost hawk to the original mask thing. But the ghost hawk is like a brand new mask that would have appeared in 2002 when he came back, or 98, 99, whenever he came back from Manhattan, he got it then. And we tipped that in Never Hike in the Snow. When the deputy sees that kind of box of masks that were on the ground, that's where that mask came from. It's from that batch, but there's a whole story behind it.
Oh, wow. I love how much thought you put into it, because it really, like, it just shows what a super fan you really are of all of it. And honestly, I know I talked about it a bit on the podcast, and I just want to touch on it too. It's why I was glad you did the snow thing and even the found footage thing, because those were all things that had been talked about for potential movies at one time or another.
The hospital bit as well, like the whole thing, because part 3 was supposed to start at the hospital, Amy Steele had come back, kind of thing. I love that. So we're like, finally we get the hospital bit that we're supposed to get in a way. So I love that as well.
Yeah, I mean, everything in the Never Hike is sort of drawing back to things that were established, but those things weren't always carried through. So what would it look like if this town, like, okay, we know we have Wessex County, we know we have these locations, we know we have this, we know that this is sort of the way that the department works. Let's make it a living work. Let's world build. Let's actually world build and stick to it and say these things really happen and make it count, versus like, well, just erase the whiteboard and whatever. You know what I mean?
Just doing what sequels should do, just what legacy sequels should do, sequels in general should do.
And I mean, I definitely took shots a little bit at the Halloween franchise for that with the reboots. Is like, I enjoy parts of it, but it's always frustrating when they look at it like, you know, one of the little magic boards where you can just shake it and go, look, the canon doesn't matter. We're just going to start new again. And it's like, yeah, that's the easy way out, but like, let's try to build off of it. Let's do something different. And I love that you found those pieces, you know, like there are ways to tell those stories and make it accessible for new audiences while also giving us nerds a chance to really enjoy the build.
It's you just don't trust the audience, it feels like, when it comes to that. Like, oh, they're not going to get that. Oh, there's too much baggage. No, you can have the baggage and done right for both people while still making it accessible for a new audience as well. And you know what new audiences should do? Maybe do a little work if you're going to go see a new movie. And I mean, like that's a bit of both for me. Like do the work, make it accessible, but don't erase don't kill your prime audience there. Reward your prime audience for being there. That's what got you there in the first place.
Yeah, or I mean, it really does come down to that of being, you just got to be clever with it. You know what I mean? Like you got to really understand the fan to make the changes, because you know what, you know, the things you'll take out, you know, like we got a lot of slack for taking out nudity, and we got a lot of slack for taking out the body count, but it was one of those things of being like, well, I'm going to try to make up for it in different ways. And I always felt that the nudity the focus on the sex scene sort of took away from the Friday the 13th experience, and sort of it shuns people away. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, it's a movie made by a bunch of immature people who want to see boobs.
Yeah.
Like, I get it, but at the same time, like, it's very immature and it doesn't serve the movie in any way. It doesn't serve the story unless you kind of work in some type of reason for why it works and you do it in a fun way. But to me, it was like, this doesn't require it. And if anything, the only thing I was actually trying to get nude in the movie was Kyle. I was like, we're going to flip it on a script. I'm going to show this man's cheeks in the middle of YouTube. Like, we're going to do something for the ladies this time. Like,
nice.
The ladies and the gays are going to love this movie. I kept saying, you know what I mean? So it was like, let's flex the final guy, you know, let's flex, like, and Never Hike. Like, the fun thing about Never Hike Alone too, is that it is a bizarro Friday the 13th film for real. Like, there were things that, like, so the score, obviously we didn't take Harry Manfredini's score. And I was like, I think and at the time we were operating in the space of like, we want to do Friday the 13th, but we don't want to take directly from Friday the 13th because that sort of feels cheap. And it sort of feels like it's too easy that way. And it won't fit the modern, like the old music doesn't fit the modern style. And so I went back and listened to the original Harry Manfredini tracks. And I realized very quickly that I was like, wait, he's borrowing a lot from Psycho. Psycho is Bernard Herrmann. So let's go to Bernard Herrmann's library. And I said, what if Harry Manfredini one day was listening to Psycho and be like, well, we're making a horror movie. Psycho is the best horror movie ever made. So I'm just going to make Psycho, but I'm going to give it this twist. And he said, what if he listened to another Bernard Herrmann score and was like, oh, like, I'm going to take this and I'm going to twist it. And so we actually went off of, I think, Vertigo.
That makes so much sense now.
And so if you remember the opening of Never Hike Alone, it's the low lows and the high highs and the low lows. So I said, what if Harry Manfredini did Vertigo score instead of Psycho? And so it all started with things like that. We literally don't do Kill Kill Ma Ma. We do Ch Ch Ah Ah because it's not going to infringe on the rights. Like, we changed things about the mask because it was enough that you recognized it, but different enough that it wasn't based on the old designs. It was a brand new mask that was found in a new thing that had a brand new story. And so there were all these things that, like, again, like, they were, because it created a bizarro version of Friday the 13th, but because they were so in sync with similar choices that the original Fridays had made, that it sort of was able to run congruently with them. And people, even though it was different, it still felt like the same essence and it felt like the same sort of energy. And I think people picked up on that. And then it became about retelling the story, bringing people back, like bringing them through the crime scenes and taking their, like I said there, but, you know, even recreating those scenes, it's like, yes, obviously we're not in the same cabin as, you know, Kevin Bacon and, you know, and the other actress. It was, you know, but you understand where you are. You understand where you are when you see Friday the 13th. Understand when they see these bunk beds and they see the hole in the mattress and they see the blood pooled in that very specific spot, that there was a body taken out of there. Right. That you know, and if we had gotten the angle, you would have saw that there was blood pooled in the top mattress as well, because Ned was up there. And so, so we were in like. There's little things that like Steve, like we wanted to establish that Steve Christie was a pervert. That's why he keeps the Playboy in his little thing like that. He finds him there because that's Steve Christie's Playboy. Like,
that's so good.
There are like little things like they're just little nuggets along the way that like they're all in, like it's always inspired by something from the original movie that we were trying to, you know, my family is in the antiques, and one of the things we do sometimes is house clean outs, which is sometimes you're going through people's lives and you see like what they leave after they're gone. And so I'm sort of always inspired by that in a way that, like, when people go, like they leave lives behind, they leave stories behind, like different things, and like everything that you've ever hid anywhere is eventually going to be found. And like, so it kind of helps you bring these characters back to life, even though they're not there or talked about.
Yeah, I do want to ask, you mentioned, of course, the whole time, this whole interview, you've been talking about like bringing things back from earlier and everything else. You're working with, you know, with Tom Matthews, working with Vinny Guastaferro and everything. Did they have like any like input on you on like their characters or what they thought Tommy and Rick would be doing and everything else? Did you have conversation with them about that? Did they have any suggestions or anything, or did they just kind of do what they're told?
Yeah, no. Tom was definitely very, very vocal about sort of the things Tommy would and wouldn't do, what he wanted to do. Like originally, I was like, "We're going to put that jacket on," and he's like, "I'm not wearing that jacket." He's like, Tommy would have thrown that thing out a long time ago, and I think that was his personal jacket back in the day, and I think he just wanted something new. So I think with we sort of had to reinvent him a little bit. With Vinny, I actually made a little bit of a mistake in Never Hike in the Snow because I mean, it's not a mistake in a sense that I did get what I wanted, but I found, I realized that by asking Vinny to dim it down, I wasn't getting the full Vinny. Like, but at the same time, what I was trying to get Vin to understand about where his character was is that he's got this town convinced that he's like the good grandpa sheriff, that he's doing his job, he's earning his paycheck, and this is a safe town. Beaches are open today, nothing to worry about, no shark in the water. Like, and so when he's around his other deputies, he's calm, cool, and collected. When he's around Diana, he's sincere and I'm gonna do my job and blah 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 blah. And then when Tommy's around, he's like then he becomes Vinny. And like Tommy draws that young deputy version of him from part 6 out of him and gets him to sort of elaborate and be that. And because Vinny spent so much of that time as us establishing of like, no, I want you to seem like you're a good cop. And then it's sort of like at the end, we get to see him being a little wild, but not crazy. And he sort of does the yabang at the end. I remember reading a lot of comments be like, oh yeah, there's Vinny. That's the Vinny I know. And so in part 2, it was nice because like Vinny could come unhinged and Rick did become unhinged. We were able to sort of like, from the, like my mom says it all the time when she talks about it. She's like, my favorite part is when he just slams the door at the beginning. There's something about him just doing that. And I was like, yeah, when I was on set, like I like had to keep myself from laughing. I didn't tell him to do that. Like that's the thing about Vinny is like, he's an actor's actor. He's been doing it for so long. He taught an acting class. In fact, I went to 2 years of Vinny's acting class.
No way.
I wasn't in the class as like a student. I was there just to observe because I wanted to see the way he spoke with actors and the way actors were making choices and just hear them talk to each other and the way that they supported each other and just be a fly in the wall so I could be better when I was on set. And, Vin was so like, cool. When I got to sit back and watch Vin, like, act on my set, it was so much fun because then I started to see him applying his techniques and it became easier for me to like sort of shape the way he was going to be. But I also saw that like, that's what actors bring. You know what I mean? Like as a director and a writer, you can write something on the page, you can ask somebody to do a performance, but if you go out there with a result-oriented sort of view, you're like, I want you to sound like this and I want you to do it this, people come off wooden and stiff because it's not how they're naturally creating the character themselves. You have to sort of give them these guidelines and say, go work on this character, show up to set prepared with a character to go. And that's what Vinny came up with. Because in the first one, I threw him a curveball where he was ready to be that guy. And I was like, I need you to, I need you to tamp it down for a little bit because there's an arc here and I need you to establish this and then we'll get to that. And because he got to get with this, he was able to make those decisions and go with his instinct to just be Vinny the whole time. And now he wasn't worried about showing his colors in front of his crew and all these different things. And it was a lot of fun. In fact, doing the sheriff scene stuff was the most fun stuff of like him interacting with other people, like, and him just being that he's just such a big actor. So it was sort of letting him go, letting him tell Rick's story, and then really writing, I think at the end, writing to Vin. I think one of my other favorite lines in the whole movie is when Tommy goes, "You don't know what you're dealing with," and he pulls out the other gun. He's like, "It's the other way around." It's like the most Rick line. Like these are the things that like those are the moments when I'm writing the script where I'm literally laughing out loud because I'm not even writing the lines at that part. Rick is just alive in my head. I'm like, oh my God, this fucking guy. And like, I'm just recording what's happening. I'm just like, this fucking idiot. And I love it. You know what I mean?
You're just writing on Rick and Vinny's acting because I love the fact that I agree with you entirely. You can't go full Rick right away because it doesn't work that way. He's an older guy. He's been through things. I love the fact I mentioned this in the podcast. I love the fact that he basically comes across as this like really like good sheriff and everything else, becomes unhinged eventually. But like it really works because that trope is there that the sheriff doesn't believe anybody talk about Jason coming back. It's a trope it's almost unbelievable at this point. It's kind of like, okay, yeah, we know the authorities aren't going to believe it. But the way Vinny acted, the way Rick dealt with it, because of his interactions with Tommy, it made so much sense. And it was a believable version of dismissive attitude and everything else.
Yeah.
But then when it gets to that hospital scene, when it kind of flips the boat, I love that scene when he finally, he's like, it all comes clear in his mind. Oh, fuck. You can see this, like, his face. This whole thing is, fuck at that point. But I love the fact you gave him the badass moment, the badass scenes, even though the audience kind of was like, all right, he's not really a badass, but he's going to have the badass moment and everything else. And his death was just one of my favorites in the whole series. You know, the whole the pumpkin head kind of
that was,
good.
I think with him it was, you know, one thing I don't think I really got super clear across. It's sort of there. Tommy sort of hints at it, but like there was a little bit more in Never Hike in the Snow and sort of another version of the ending where actually there was a version of the ending where we didn't kill Mabry, where like Mabry's the one who took it away. Rick was the one who stayed. He was going to go investigate the camp and he chickened out. And he decided not to. And not
interesting.
And that he was just too, like, even though he didn't think Jason would exist, he still wouldn't go into the camp. And there was something sort of scary. And like literally, like he would drive away and Jason was like literally right there just waiting for him.
Right.
And like, and that was sort of like how Snow was supposed to end. And I was like, that's lame. I was like, we need to come up with something. We got more money. And I was like, we're blowing this dude's head off. Like, it's going to be great. Because it was like another thing where it's like Jason's never used a weapon like that before, but what if he turned it on someone else? And I was like, and I just thought about it like, oh my God, what if we I don't know, I just have like, I'm all about head trauma. Like maybe it was just too much football in my life. Yeah. So, but yeah, so it was, I really wanted to establish that he was really afraid, and him at the end is him like facing his fear, being like, no, I am the badass. Like, you know, and even him, like, and he even muttered some of those things he improvised, and that's why we chose him. It's like, I'm not afraid of you. And, you know, Tommy calls him a chicken shit at the beginning of the movie, and then he hears this thing in the woods and he's kind of hearing it, and he gets in his car and he goes away. He has no, you know, interest. It's sort of there. But, you know, we just couldn't, I wish I could have written more scenes with him sort of like dealing with his actual fear of what he thinks is going to happen. And I think that, yeah, we gave Tommy enough sort of ammunition, or gave Rick enough ammunition from Tommy to say, like, it is plausible to think that Tommy could be involved with this, but there's just this, but what happened to my deputy?
Right.
I was so convinced. Like, obviously, Tommy was there. He's at the crime scene. He knew it happened. He's writing on my, you know, he's trying to say, like, he killed this guy so he could write Jason on the hood and get everybody stirred up and act like the hero. But he's not the hero. I'm the hero. And I think that it goes all the way back to part 6 for him getting locked in the jail cell, everybody making fun of him, Tommy getting the girl, because we all know Rick had a crush on Megan. And
right.
And you know what I mean? And so he's just had this vendetta against Tommy ever since. So it's just made him so blind. And again, like, if you have more story, if this was like, if I had a series on Peacock, I could have dove into all of this stuff and had a real fun soap opera of it all. But, you know, we're making fan films, we're working within budgets. It's like, let me take this. But I think what the interesting thing and a great storytelling tool is, like, even though you're only seeing a moment in time, if you can just sort of get out of your own film for a little bit and just watch these people's lives front to back, it just informs you for how they're going to act and what you can actually do on screen that will feel natural. And so that's what a lot of happens, even though there's more story than that's really there. And I sort of have to explain things. It's like, at the same time, the way people are acting on set, you can see how naturally they feel going into it, because these are choices that we've talked about, because we've talked about the lives of the characters and the cast is, and I also do take into account who is acting, like who is in a certain role, and I write to strengths and weaknesses. Sort of, I know what their cadences are. I know what their natural performances sort of look like when they just act like themselves. And a lot of the times I just need people to sort of be the natural selves. Like Anna really is like you know, she's smart, she is driven, she is self-sufficient, and, you know, she's put together. And so, and she's just a great actress. So to ask her to, you know, to wear that was, you know, wear that weight of what she was going through was, like, I think very natural for her. You know, Drew, you know, becoming Kyle, that was very naturally Andrew. It was just taking the best parts of his personality and just being like, you are a host, be you. Right. I mean, you could host a show, so let's just put you out there and let you have fun, because you're a goofball. And, you know, I'd rather watch your stories on your Instagram than half the things I see in reality TV. So just be you, and just, you know, I'll just keep you between the lanes. And so, you know, even down to like the security guard, Justin, like Brian, who was actually supposed to be the original person who was killed in Never Hike in the Snow. I ended up changing it up. It was supposed to be a hunter, And then it was supposed to be somebody's husband went missing. And then somebody else made a fan film about hunters, and they were a friend of mine. And I was like, I'm not like, you have hunters covered. Let me come up with something different. And then the idea of having a kid get killed, I was like, oh, what has Jason ever done before? Kill the kid. And so I ended up changing it. And I said, Brian, I promise you I will get you into these movies. I promise, I promise, I promise. And because he was the person in one of the first images we released where it's the guy in camouflage diving away from the tree with Jason with the machete stabbing down to his back. That's Brian. So when I came up with Justin Sabo, like, and Brian, I was just like, be you, man. Like you could just be kind of goofy self. And like, I think that people are just going to like you. Like, you're so likable. And that's the point of this guy. Like, you want him to be the likable security guard. He's a bit of a Deputy Dewey. And sort of like bring it. And so it's, and so everybody on the crew and on the cast sort of like, that's sort of like just their natural, I think just their natural talents. It was just like, hey, we don't have to try to reinvent the wheel with a lot of these characters. Like, I don't need caricatures out there. I don't want people, I don't want the cigar smoking sheriff from part 5 being like, I put him in an ashtray. You know what I mean? Like, we wanted real people. And I think that was the point, because at the same time, the death of it all, I think that I was really inspired by things like Blue Ruin and Green Room, like Jeremy Saulnier's work, and things where like death had meaning, and that close combat things actually had real effects on people, where like if you were stabbed, it doesn't just kill you, like you bleed out and die, and it's a long dying process. And so what happens if like you have that type of experience with Jason, where you get chopped up but you're not dead, you're just still there bleeding and dying? How awful would that be? And that's sort of what I wanted to do to Kyle in the first movie, was like keep beating the shit out of him and seeing how much he can take within like the budget that we could do. You know what I mean? Like, if I had my choice, maybe I would have had his hand cut off. You know what I mean? Like, take it all the way there to where like he's really just trying to survive no matter what happens to him, but that these things wouldn't necessarily kill people. But it's always there. I mean, I was inspired by so many different things when making this.
I love that inspiration, because it really it weirdly grounds a franchise that's not necessarily grounded, and it still lets it be that supernatural side, but also pushing the characters to really feel real and fleshed out and fun and different. And I really appreciate that, because these movies are full of caricatures after a while, and this was the first time in a long time that they felt real again, and I actually started to relate to them.
See, and you just reminded me about, like, one of the things that bugged me about 2009 was when Aaron Yu is like, we're all just one big happy cliche, and I was just like, so you think I'm an idiot? That's what you're telling me. You're telling me that I'm stupid and that I don't need real character. Like, because I think as fans, we fell in love with characters like Tommy. We cared about them. Like, the movies did something where we were like, oh my God, I care about this character. I want them to survive. And the more they came about, let's just come up with a bunch of like cliche teenagers from that time and watch them die, and we'll just come up with interesting kills for them. The films were fun, but they lost this extra piece.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And without that piece, it sort of just cheapens the whole experience. And I know that there are plenty of Friday the 13th fans out there who are like, book story. You know what I mean? Like, again, like, that's why there's 12 different slices of this pizza, and there's movies out there, then there's fan films, and there's things that will do that for you. Like, if you just want death, there's plenty of other fan films out there that just go hard on death and light on story. And you just, they do that thing. I always thought, and I always felt as a fan, that like, what if Friday the 13th had a story? And it would just hit different. Like, if Friday the 13th had that Halloween sort of like repertoire, like, Halloween's like a really good story, actually. Like, the first film is actually really good. Like, it's like Friday, it's like, no, part 6 is really good. Part 4 is you're gonna have to do that. Like, Friday the 13th never really had that one calling card film. And so it was like, what if it did? And then what if it was so well built that you could build 1 million more movies off of it? Because that would be even better. And so I really tried to come up with a formula that I thought that I really do still think that the studios could follow our formula for the rules of how Jason works. And they could build giant, massive movies off of it and do a lot of different fun things and explore different stories with different people. And it would be pretty rad.
Could being the operative word. It seems like, the studios, we have all the rights issues. And I don't know. I don't know how you feel, but I think Sean Cunningham is probably the worst person to be in charge of Friday the 13th because he could give a shit. I feel like at this point, I hate saying that he gave us the original, but you can tell all the way around he has no idea what he's doing as far as Friday the 13th.
I mean, I'm sure Sean is happy with the results of what the franchise gave him, and it probably sucks losing the rights and being able to do those things and have a say, and get another crack at it. But I really do think that that the fans need a fresh start, and I'm really looking forward to Brian Fuller's take.
Me too.
And you know what I mean? And so I think that it's coming from a place where it's finally in the hands of someone who is a true creative and sort of grew up with a love for it. Not, even the guy who created it sort of like let it go and it became something else. And now the fans see it for something, but he wasn't really a part of the stuff that made it go that way. Like it was different.
He tried to cut it down. Like he was like part of the nine. Like, I want to see the mask. I want to see this. And he really deconstructed it in a way that he wanted to go a different direction and take it away from what had actually kind of made it successful at that point. I don't need to trash him. I feel
but I think he was trying to do, because I think he was probably sick of it back then. And I don't think that he truly is in love with the franchise. I think he just wants them to make more so he can continue to profit off of it. And I think that that's fine. I mean, he after all, he was the one who came up with the idea. He's the one who put the ad in Variety. You always got to give him credit for that. It's just wow for the future. And I would say the same thing for Victor Miller too. Hey, I'm glad he won the rights for himself as far as finally getting paid for the work that he did. But at the same time, he also wasn't a part of what made Jason Jason. Yeah. And I don't think he relates to or really loves the franchise. And I think if you let Victor Miller write a sequel to Friday the 13th, it wouldn't look anything like what we did. And I don't think he would ever try to do that, Jason. So it's I think at this point, the fans sort of own Jason, and the people who are the alumni who have gone to the conventions and who have sung its praises and been out there dancing with tap shoes for the franchise for over 40 years, keeping it alive with fans. I think that they are the people that sort of they all kind of share in it. And it has to be people who understand the fans and the franchise as a whole and can pick that baton and be out there and make decisions about this franchise that they know that if they make this decision, it's either going to send fans to the hills with pitchforks, or they're going to be cheering your name. And, I think that, in certain degrees, they were pulling on directors for a while that didn't really have a vested emotional interest in how well it catered to Friday the 13th fans. They were just trying to make their next big movie. And it's nice that I think that from what I can understand about Brian Fuller is that he's a nerd.
Yeah,
he's a super nerd about it. So what you're going to see, I think, is a lot of the same sort of he's going to treat fans the way that we treated them in Never Hike Alone, but he's going to do it at a much higher scale with many more resources and being able to, I think, go back to one place that I've always wanted to see explored, which is what are the events that led to Jason's death and what were the events that led to him coming back. Right. And so that's such a big, if you're going to tell a certain Jason story, if he's going to be alive or if he's going to be undead, just show me the path that gets there. So I know what the rules are as the films move forward. So knowing that if Jason is a human, well, if he fights the people to the death, he can't take an axe into his brain and get back up. He's going to have to answer to reality. But if he's working within reality, just come up with clever ways for him to get around it, near-death experiences, or they have him and it doesn't quite work and it works in his favor. And there is this sort of bad luck that follows everyone else, but he's the one who sort of gets it. There's cool ways to sort of work in the curse and work in the different mechanisms to get everything moving versus just a mindless, soulless slasher. That's just, oh, I died once, so now you're all going to die too. It's
you can only tread that water, pun pretty much fully intended at that point, but so long, right? I mean, there's a reason that even as much as we all love those initial movies, the audience was even tapering off after a bit, because once you start doing the same thing and you're not necessarily pushing it in a new direction, what new thing are we getting? Why do we care? Right. And so that's part of the hard part, I think, sometimes with some of these too, because then fans also can get big mad depending on the situation and what you're doing. You're never going to make everyone happy, but just do it within the confines of a world we all like. And I think that you'll ultimately win over most people if the decisions feel in line at least and feel real to the franchise.
Very much. And I think that, for the most part, it's if you treat your audience, give set up things and pay them off and have it feel like it's don't cheat. And I feel like that was one of the things that happened in Halloween's. They cheated a couple of things and they jammed some
Yep.
things in there that might have not needed to be in there. And it's sort of, it ruins the experience because you're asking the story to carry a little bit more weight than it has to. It's like finding the simplistic story and then take people on a ride where they don't see things coming along the way. Like they even know things are going to happen, but it just sort of, I don't know. It's like,
you think it's
like
going to go right and juke left, that sort of thing.
Or even just like, you know, give us something, like if you're going to explain something, do it in a way that like blows people's minds and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe it. This was the answer the whole time. This gives me like, okay, now I can believe this. Not to say that like, oh, like the movie about the killer monster has to like be so believable, but there's something to playing that game of like making it sort of believable that sort of it raises the experience, I think, for people. And so not just going right to Cheapville, like actually writing a line of saying this is a standard of dramatic storytelling and we're going to make this horror character live up to it. And it's going to make it even more terrifying.
Absolutely. And actually, Halloween, like you said, Halloween did a lot of cheats that way as well. We had David Gordon Green trilogy. PJ and I actually had this great conversation at one point. We actually, I don't know if you feel this way. Halloween Ends, we actually felt should have been the first part of the trilogy. They should have swapped Halloween Ends and put Halloween in 2018. It seems like having the copycat thing, that's what wakes Michael Myers up in a way who had been gone for a while. You have like the happy homemaker, Jamie Lee Curtis, like who's gotten over her trauma at that point, because that was a weird transition.
Yeah. And now that he's actually out and about, now I'm going to take down my steel gates. Yeah.
Right. That's what that was. The
now that my daughter's dead, now I can sleep nice at night.
Now I'm happy. Yeah. Lucky.
Weird things in that trilogy.
But doing it the other way around actually could have served a great purpose and have Michael actually come back at the end to get the full-on Michael versus Laurie thing you want at the end in a way. I think much better.
I think if they would have flipped Laurie around to that, but what I would have liked is that if they would have just killed Michael after kills. And that what Corey finds is a dead body.
The whole thing.
Corey finds his dead. Like they've been searching for Michael. All of a sudden, he stumbles across his corpse in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles house, and is like, "I could fucking ruin everybody's life. I'm like, I can be this.
Yeah,
you know what I mean." And then he makes that. It's not Michael looking him in the eyes, being like, "I understand your pain. Take my pain too." And like looking at him, you know, as he's like running away. It's like this moment where you can see like Corey kneeling over this body and he pulls the mask off Michael and it's just like this decrepit skull and like rotted skin and it's just these black eye holes within the skull and he's staring into the skull holes and like the skull holes are staring back at him. Now I'm getting like a powerful moment where you see the wheels turning in Corey's head where he makes a decision and then the old man walks in. You know what I mean?
Beautiful.
And then, and then he finds you know the dead corpse. And he's like, what the fuck is this? And then he turns around and Corey's wearing the mask. And he's sort of like, and then you realize that you can play with like is like Corey's losing himself. Like he's like, it's almost like part 2 Nightmare on Elm Street where like, fuck, like, like did that really just happen? Did I really just kill a homeless person? Like, how did I get to my girlfriend's house? Like,
they needed a lot of that.
They needed that, and I think
like
that would have really
were there. Like they had it like they had it right in front of them. It feels like, and they just made every wrong decision possible. It felt like it sometimes. But speaking of Halloween, I do have to ask you. You have got to play Jason a little bit. You got to play Michael in the Spirit of Haddonfield. Are you ever going to do Freddy and complete the trilogy?
I actually technically have in Dylan's New Nightmare. I do a scene where we needed to do a pickup close up of Miko getting the glove on his chin. So I actually articulate the glove in that scene.
Are you serious? Oh my God.
Yeah. So I got to do it a little bit, but I think I would be too big if you do Freddy. I would hate to do this to you guys, but I do have to go in a few minutes and I gotta let someone in, but this has been awesome. Sorry, I've been like blabbering the whole time, but I figured out like,
let me just exactly what we wanted.
Let me just throw as much of the stuff that I can at them to like, because you guys would get it and you guys can, you know, talk about it. And if you guys want to keep going or whatever and just kind of dissect it and talk about things, if you ever want to email me and ask questions, like I'm always here. And that's the thing, like fans too. Like I love getting emails from fans talking about stuff. When I see fans get excited about Friday the 13th, I get excited. And if Never Hike Alone's the thing that does it, then that's a really cool feeling for me.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Last question I'll ask. Top 3 Fridays for you.
6, 4, 2.
Perfect.
My man.
All right. All right. Go ahead. Tell folks where they can find you.
Yeah. Womp Stomp Films on YouTube. You can watch all renditions of Never Hike Alone. We have it also in 4K. We also have a black and white version. And then we obviously have the ghost cut, Never Hike in the Snow, Disappear, and Never Hike Alone 2. There's lots of behind the scenes that if you want to know more about how the films were made, definitely watch the behind the scenes. And we just actually recently released each of the film's soundtracks on YouTube, so you can stream it while you're at work, which I found myself doing that for other things as well. And I was like, why don't I have the Never Hike Alone soundtrack so people can do this? And maybe I can like actually get more stuff on the channel. So definitely check out our YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all those things. Keep an eye out for a Kickstarter that we're going to launch this summer for the final cut, which is going to combine all the films into one sort of seamless, hopefully, story, like weaving all the films together front to back, which we're sort of working on right now. We're actually working on some artwork for it right now too. It's going to be a good time.
Can't wait for that. Thank you so much. Obviously, you're always welcome back. We're having to do this again sometime. And thank you so much, man.
Thank you guys. I'll see you guys soon.
Yeah, have a great one.
Okay.
Bye.
How cool was that?
That was great, man. That was awesome. That was
how cool was that? I honestly, he fits so well within the confines of how we handle things here. And I was just so excited because he sounds so much like us and being those guys who just love horror movies. And he name dropped Puppet Master, and all I wanted to do was like, oh my God, like
I almost have something.
I did. I thought about it. I was looking because you can see like the Puppet Master movies are right above my head right there. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, do I pull them down and be like, I even have Demonic Toys versus Puppet Master on DVD still? Like, it just made me so happy because, like as a joke, I've been running so hard on the Puppet Master thing for so long.
So funny that was the first name he dropped. I'm like, he fucking just said Puppet Master first, and that's awesome. That's so great.
Yeah.
He didn't even know.
Dude, I feel vindicated.
You are vindicated, absolutely. No, here's one of that. I wish we actually had more time. I want to dive into more like just general horror stuff. I would love to sit there and talk just about regular horror, not regular horror, but like other.
I owe him a beer. If we ever get to all hang out together, we owe him 100%. All the beers to just hang out and talk horror, because it's the same thing. Like we were kind of digging into it too, where we start talking about the franchises, and I love that he doesn't disagree with us on our takes on the Halloween franchise. You know what I'm saying? I like that we kind of start to dive into that, and there's so much more. Like you can tell he has such a passion for this stuff in the same way that we always have, and I love that.
100%. Yeah, he like I said, it's the gift. He's one of us for sure. I think we're gonna have to reach out again in maybe like a little while, like a couple months, 6 months, a couple months from now, we'll have him on again. And therefore we can actually just have a sequel and talk about where he is as far as the full cut goes, everything else, what he's doing in the future, and also we can just talk general horror stuff as well. Get the rest of our stuff in there. He already gave us. He was generous with his time, and I love the fact he was so generous with his time. And I got to learn so much about Never Hike Alone. I hope that you guys who are watching us now watch the interview. Hope you enjoyed that. I hope you, if you haven't gone but to see the film, you really that doesn't teach you to do it, then I don't know what will, because like that's a guy who's passionate about it and he loves what he does. So.
And look, I mean, I know obviously we spent almost 3 hours covering both those movies between the two podcasts that we did. I mean, look, I thought we could have said enough of like why we thought that they were so awesome and why they meant so much to us. And yet to be able to hear Vincent talk about it too, even though he even says like, look, they're just kind of the bones of what more I could do with it if I had the money to. But I love that even in those bones, at least to me, there's a reason that I find them so important and so special, and they just hit in such a specific way.
Right.
And I can't wait to even go back. I do want to kind of discuss some of what he talked about more in the future. I mean, we knew he had a bit of a heart out, but we all just kind of kept going. And I loved his excitement. It was where he was like, shit, well, even I have to go. And I hope that we can have him come back, because I would love to just delve into it more. He's just so fun to hang out with. And you can tell that he is a dude like you and I, who was raised inside the theater and inside like mom and pop video stores, who did the same thing as me. Like there's a reason. I had this conversation actually the other night at the bar. Someone was making fun of me a little bit for owning Puppet Master. And they're like, sometimes when you say that you own things, it's not the flex you think it is. And I'm like, I don't know what you want from me, man. Like the Puppet Master movies mean a lot. Like those initial movies, I remember getting them on VHS and how much fun they used to be just discovering them at a video store. And like, yeah, they may not be the world's best movies, but I own them because they do have a small place in my heart, like
absolutely.
It is what it is. And I love that sort of mentality, and I love the passion that comes through. And honestly, I'm excited now to see what Vincent and Womp Stomp do next. Especially because he talked about he has some original ideas.
Yeah.
Now that he's gotten through all this stuff with Friday the 13th, I'm super excited to see what they're gonna do next, because I think he just has such a passion for the genre that he can do something really cool and really special.
I think so too. I love everything he was talking about as far as originals go, what he wants to do with Never Hike Alone. I hope he gets more and more to do. I hope he gets involved. Maybe, I mean, fingers crossed, somebody eventually starts noticing him in the studios. Maybe they can actually get him something in there, because he's a talented enough individual. He knows what.
Could you imagine if Fuller let him get involved in the Crystal Lake series and he got to do stuff with it?
It'd be perfectly great. I mean, I know we don't have a loud voice on this, but throwing it out there as best we can, because the guy gets it. He does it. He did what he did on a very little budget. So give him a little bit of a budget and have him, like, you heard those ideas that he was talking about, stuff he wanted to do, but he couldn't do because of budgetary reasons and everything else. Like that whole the fiery Jason would have been freaking amazing.
Well, not just that. I mean, look, man, I gotta say, credit where credit's due. His whole thing with like taking the ghost Jason all the way back to Pamela, going on the dock and like praying to God to give Jason back to her, only to realize that the wrong God
had answered.
Like, are you? Yeah. And that being the spirit of all of this, that, yes, are you kidding me? Give me that. Like, I want the Pamela story, because I actually think there's a story there about her being haunted by all of it that is fascinating.
I agree. And the thing you can do about it is retroactively making something that wasn't there. Sometimes a lot of people would hate the idea of retroactively changing the beginning, but as a film that was started off, let's be honest, it started off as a ripoff of Halloween. They didn't care about lore. It was just like a good slasher film mask. So if you can retroactively make that into something more that actually connects the entire saga together, I think it's something you could do. Is a beautiful idea. It can work so well, and it almost feels like a no-brainer to do at that point. So, I mean, absolutely. Let him go off.
Yeah, I was really into that. I never wanted to overstep while he was talking, because I was loving listening to him. But that was something that piqued my interest really quickly, because to me that is such a cool and specific thing, that Pamela is a character that I don't think has ultimately been fleshed out in a very meaningful way. And this finally does. It makes her it makes it seem more than just the aggrieved, tortured mother. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it becomes something so much worse. It becomes like she's haunted. She's not crazy. She's not just angry. She's been haunted by this, and she's been pushed into this. I love that, because it actually makes her feel a little more damaged too. It makes her feel, you almost feel bad, but also I kind of love the psychological nature of that. And it continues the trend of what these films have done, which is everyone's trauma moving forward, and the way that Jason continues to haunt them through this curse in specific ways.
Absolutely. I really am so happy we had this conversation. I'm so grateful that I'm so thankful that you tagged him initially in the first place, and I'm grateful that he saw what he saw. He saw us and he saw us and him and us, kind of thing, in a way. And it just ended up being a perfect conversation as far as I'm concerned. I hope you guys out there enjoyed as much as we did. If you'd like us to do that more, I'd like to do more interviews and stuff, possibly, as a way to shake up our franchise going through. And if we can get him back on, great. I think we should get on other luminaries that we can find in a way that will do it for us. Maybe even, like, especially as you all know, when we do Nightmare on Elm Street, we're going to do Dylan's New Nightmare. Maybe through him, maybe we can get an interview with some people involved in that as well, heavily involved in that as well. Maybe do some interview with him, with them.
I know that, again, like, we don't have the world's biggest voices, but I do appreciate that people are willing to make time. And I think for Vincent, seeing how excited and how passionate we were about it, it's cool to have, I've said it before, part of why we do this is just to put our passion out there for the things that we love, and hope to share the passion that the people behind it were. And so to have like a very direct link to that this time was so cool. And to be able to sit down with someone who cares this much so that we could pick their brain, how fun, how cool, how much farther can we take that? You know what? We'll shoot our shot. We always do.
Absolutely. Can't, you shoot your shot and see what happens. Absolutely. So, great stuff. Great episode. I'm excited about it. PJ, where can the folks find you?
You guys can find me on all the socials at PJ Campbell. You can also find me here hanging out, doing the thing with this gentleman. We have the best time just talking movies, talking shop. And I know that we're going to be taking a little bit of a break from the main show for a little bit so that we can focus on our Doctor Who show. I know that sounds weird, but we are very busy individuals. It's very hard sometimes to sit down, and we both have had a lot going on. So I'm really excited to sit down and talk Doctor Who for a little bit, for about 7 weeks, because the show will be back next weekend, and I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm just excited to spend some time in the sci-fi world with you for a bit, my friend.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Obviously, if we didn't have jobs, we didn't have family and stuff, we didn't have anything else. Like if we could do, I would happily do 2 or 3 podcasts with this gentleman. I would do a straight horror podcast. I would do other franchise podcast. And I would do a straight Doctor Who podcast. That's what we all would do. But we can sometimes have a hard time doing a bi-weekly podcast just for this. You've seen that we had to take breaks here and there as things have popped up.
Life
has popped up, exactly. So with that being said, it made sense. We hit the end of the Friday the 13th saga at the right time. We can take a little bit of break. We'll do our 7 or 8 week run on the Big Blue Box. We're actually going to do a weekly podcast for that. We're going to try to make that work as best we can. And then we will return. And to make our Wick Dudes on Film will return. We'll do John Wick before jumping into the Nightmare on Elm Street saga, like you said, including Dylan's new Nightmare. As far as we can go, at Apologist4Newsio on Twitter. You can find me all over this channel. I do review with Lego. Had a great episode we put up just today. As I'm filming this on Thursday, it went up today. I read the unproduced script from this episode 20. It was never filmed. We got the script, hold the script. I read it out loud. Lego reacted to it. A lot of fun, hilarious reactions. It's a ridiculous episode for sure. We do Crown Jewels, my Queen podcast, of course, every week. Holy Snokes, Star Wars podcast every week as well. I think that's everything.
That sounds right.
Sounds about right. Yeah. Like, subscribe, hit our Patreon, patreon.com/PLD Projects. Awesome Goodell, Jeff Alterman, Brendan Buckingham, all great people and part of that crew. And if you can't, I get it. Just hit those comments, share it out. Let's build this community together. All right, guys?
And I just want to say real fast, if this is your first time here, once again, thank you so much for listening all the way through. I really hope you guys had fun. Again, the subscribe button is all down below. Yeah. But I actually want to send one shout out to one of our patrons, Miss Danny Ramirez. She just went through a very, very hard time with the passing of her father, and she has been someone that we have both known for a very long time. So I wanted to send a big shout out to her. We love you, Danny. I hope you and your family are getting through everything. Just want to send you a lot of love. You're the best, and we're here for you and anyone else. If you guys need us, you know where to find us, being 2 pretty mediocre white guys on film talking the movies.
We're mediocre, but we're findable. So
we do what we can.
I guess we'll see you next time. Until then, take care.
Peace.